AI. So this service design for livework was born out of a digital background for all three of the founders. And back then, 12 years ago, when I'm sure things have moved on in digital design world a lot since then, but we were becoming frustrated with a number of projects where we would do the best job we could, and then the business or the project we were working on wouldn't succeed, and we often felt it was due to factors outside of the then generally website or digital solution that was being developed. You know, there would be a problem either in the strategy up front or in some other aspects of the customer's experience, which meant that the business wasn't as successful as it could be. So we sort of sat back and said, well, why is that happening, and what could we do about it? And at the same time, we'd quite like to get out of these big companies and do something ourselves. And chanced upon the kind of a whole domain of literature about services and about how services are generally in Western Europe and the United States somewhere between 75% and 80% of the economy, but there's very little kind of in the design world about how do you go about designing for that kind of economy. You know, our design heritage comes from, and Marty sort of mentioned something similar, it comes from the industrial age. Design and industrial design was a response to manufacturing technologies, a way to make sure that the product that you developed and then deployed was as good as it could be, but it was a part of a linear process. And we were now in a world where we're in primarily service industries. Where's the kind of the design approach that has been honed specifically for those kind of industries and those kind of customer experiences? So if you think where all your money goes from your monthly paycheck, it's paying gas and electricity, which is a service, paying insurance, which is a service, paying for your phone bill, which is a service, paying for products through retailers, which is a service, and how can design come to these areas? So we now innovate, design, and develop services for our clients, but it comes from a background of sort of wanting a more holistic approach. So I thought for today it might be useful to say what I think thinking service design has brought to us and our practice, because I think it has something to offer anyone working with any aspect of a service or even a manufacturing business. We now have clients who make stuff, but then they have to look after their customers who buy it with services. So I've called the talk from users to customers, because obviously this is UX, so user is a key word in the user experience community. And I think one of the things that we felt when we said let's call it service design is that those businesses, they don't sell user experiences, they sell services, and then they're very interested in customers, because the customers are the people who pay. And this is kind of a fine distinction, but really important, and we've been thinking about it more and more recently. And it's what I mean by status. So what we're really talking about are human beings, and human beings have different status and different kind of mindset at different points in their lives, depending on what they're doing. So at times they are users and they're concerned with a task. So the task of checking out something on an online store is about their user and usability and the user experience. But at other times, after they've done that and then they receive something in the post and it's not right and they need to send it back, then they're a customer and their mindset is about value for money or how I'm being treated. And if you actually step back from, or up or down from customers, you're talking about them as consumers or as travelers or as families and ultimately as human beings. Then the second thing that I think service design has brought is to place the thing that we used to do, or place one part of an experience in a wider context. So you're placing an interaction in a broader context of people's lives, how they got there and what they do after. So there's sort of two things that I think our perspective can offer anyone really. So I wanted to take an example of a small piece of work we did for Transport for London, just to help them think about their strategy and the customer experience and the service design for something that they've started doing now, which is allowing you to pay to travel on the bus with a smart bank card. So you can now get on the bus without any ticket or any Oyster card, but with a contactless Visa card or bank card, and then the money's debited directly from your account. So they're simplifying it, and I think it's a really interesting one to take because it's as a sort of user experience, it's quite simple. I have that card, I get on the bus, I put it on the card reader, and there's a little red light or a green light and maybe a little display. So it's this kind of simple interaction that we can design to make sure it works and people understand what's just happened there. But I think what we learned by talking to people about what this might mean for them was that the context and who they are as a user or a customer actually blow this out and make it an incredibly complicated thing. You have, and I think this statement sort of talks about that. What she's looking for there isn't to be able to get on the bus and do that in a slightly more convenient way. She's kind of looking for a solution to the whole problem of being ready and paying and buying and things like that. We talked to other customers who are really worried about, well, what does this mean? Who am I a customer of? Is it the bank or is it the transport company? So that it kind of blows out. And I have a metaphor to kind of look at it. So if we just think someone's a user and we're looking at the sort of the during, the middle moment of an experience, we're kind of approaching an iceberg without being informed about what's happening before and what kind of things people need to know before they approach this. So lots of people are just asking questions like, how will this work? What will happen? So looking at service design allows us to say, okay, well, what's happening? What are the steps before I get on the bus, before I have that one interaction? And how do we prepare for that? So a recommendation from this was actually that the transport company and the bank need to work out how they're going to communicate to people how this works, who's responsible for it, how does that work. And then during, you also need to think about what goes wrong. So one of the big problems they're still grappling with is when the light goes red on the bus and the driver says your card doesn't work, and you say no, your reader doesn't work, and you're trying to get to work, it's actually a horrible thing. You know, you're having this argument with this guy who doesn't want to talk to you. So the convenience that is the kind of the big promise that everyone's thinking, oh, this would be fantastic, it's very convenient, you just put your card on. As soon as it goes wrong, it's such a big inconvenience that it really doesn't warrant me switching. And worth saying, this whole project was in the context of Transport for London, saying we really want people to do this because it saves us all sorts of costs behind the scenes. And then there's a whole world of after. So one customer we talked to said, so what happens, does every single bus journey that I make turn up on my bank statement? You have another touch point there, another whole interaction that's in the mix that we need to think about. You know, if you've got all these kind of micropayments, suddenly your bank statement looks like your mobile phone bill with every single thing itemized. So it changes that. And then other people say, well, and who has my information now? I know the Transport for London, I know everywhere I've been, and I just about trust them with that, but does that mean now my bank knows everywhere I go? And how do I feel about that? And so you start to have to talk to the bank and the transport company about what they need to say to their customers about their responsibility with their data and what that is part of the whole experience. So the second thing I had up there, the second kind of learning, so that was context. Again, to go back to that, actually, again and again, we find if we just say, we have a brief, can we look at this please? And we just say, well, can we just widen it a little bit? What's happened before this thing that you're asking us to look at, and what might happen after? Again and again, you find that the before bit, there's an opportunity to stop things going wrong during or after. So we had a project for a telco company that wanted a self-service, online, I can look after my own account thing. And we just said, well, what happens before when they become a customer? Is there an opportunity to introduce that to them in the shop, so they know what it is, and they're more likely to pick it up. So you find all sorts of opportunities by kind of just saying, push it out a bit. What's the context of this thing that you're asking us to look at? And the second thing was the status. So it's a slightly strange word, actually still working out whether it makes sense. But what's the status of the individual at different points in time? So again, we talked about someone as a user and a task orientation to that. So it's really important, and that's what we're all really good at, is saying, well, look, this is really hard, it doesn't make sense. How do I complete this task you're asking me to do? There's huge amounts of value in taking that perspective. But there's also things that we miss, and things that are really important to businesses. If you start taking the slightly different mindset, so the customer might be thinking a whole lot of different things about value for money. So we can both think about people and their task orientation, but also step back and say, well, where are they as a customer? Are they a new customer? How is this fitting into a slightly different mode? Are they somebody who has been with us for a year and their contract is coming up for renewal? So this experience is in the context of them and what they pay for and whether they'll stay with us. So we have a lot of work which is in that kind of context of a customer. How do we retain people? How do we encourage them to join? How do we encourage them to spread the word about us and things like that? Which steps us sort of up into the next level of the consumer. So this is where you, if you're thinking about approaching it from a research point of view, you really need to say, okay, well, look, your business, the organisation that's hired us, put you to one side. Where are they as a consumer? And this is a sort of catch-all term, but it might be as a traveller or as a household, or a kind of entity in a mindset where you're making decisions about which choice to make, which one to buy, or where to go, and a whole lot of things like that. So a good example back to Transport for London is they asked us to look at visitors to London. They realised that although most of their journeys are people who live here, there's this sort of small number of journeys which they were ignoring because that's insignificant. But then they realised that's actually 20 million visitors to London who are having a first-time experience and don't know how it works and frustrate the rest of us by clogging up ticket halls. So how could we have a kind of a system impact for them whilst also having a better experience for visitors to London, and then take responsibility for that part of the city and the experience of the city. So you start to think, okay, well, we're not looking at the journey on the tube, actually we're looking at the journey from Amsterdam to London and how I know about how the tube works, and I'm in that context. So you're stepping up again, which is really important. And then something which I guess is just in the back of my head most of the time, but it's just, we're talking about people, and it's really important not to forget when we start being all commercial and talking about people making consumer choices or renewing their contracts, that we don't forget that they're human beings, and we're looking closely at emerging work and things like behaviour economics, so that we understand how people work. And I'm not claiming any expertise around this, but I think it's just really important to see that and step back and say, well, it's things like respect that come in here, and how that is part of someone's experience. So I had a couple of examples of projects where this has happened. So in context, we talked in this case, it's about a customer level and what happens before the interaction that's really the core of everything that we're talking about. And that many customers never actually get to the thing that you want them to do. We've actually just had a brief which is, how do we turn our users into customers? We've got all these users, but none of them pay. How do we turn them into customers? So it's an interesting space where what happens at that early stage, what can we understand there, which could lead, that might be preventing the thing that we really want to happening. And I was very pleased to find this picture, because I think an expression says 1,000 words. This guy's pretty confused. It's a project, again, it's actually with the contactless payment. It's been a bit of a theme for us. And this is us before Orange and Barclaycard launched this on a single handset. This is the guy trying to figure out how he activates his handset with his mobile phone account and his bank account. So what we realised is that there's a very high chance that lots of people will be sold this concept by the phone, try and sign up and just give up. So it's not at all, it's not about further down the line where you have this beautiful handset experience where you tap it in for your sandwich and it tells you how much you've got left and you're in control, which was the fantastic promise. If this guy just gives up at this point, then everybody else gives up at that point. So this was a very big project where we looked at that whole experience, but there's this one insight and understanding from making something. So we made a box before it was produced so that we were able to put it in front of people and pull together as many elements as possible. Allowed us to say, okay, well, there's definitely a need for an improved design at this point before the core experience. I just jumped ahead. So here are iterations of that box. We realised if this box had just been given to the packaging company as we need a really nice box that contains this handset that does these things, we wouldn't understand how that box was working in the wider customer experience. So this box was the thing that happens before you activate. And it was a really good opportunity to make the activation a lot simpler or at least understood. What we then learnt was we couldn't change some of the technical processes at this late date, but we could sort of, what's the word for it, like soften the blow or step someone through it so that they were able to complete that thing. Maybe even apologise for it being a little bit too finicky. So what this means is what we're doing on this project is not describing, I guess, that whole experience, and our role as service designers was not to actually produce any of the individual channels or touch points, but it was to sort of direct the show in a way, or curate a number of things. So we had a single document, and I was sort of excited about it in a really geeky way. It was sort of like an alternative to a classic product specification. We actually had something here which told everybody what was going on, what needed to be brought together, but there was visual. It was visual from the beginning, because this was before any of these things were made. It was just like, let's tell the story. We had to do this to get the whole project funded, and then throughout the project there was a story-based, visual-based document which everyone could say, oh, I see how I fit into the bigger picture. And then that document was actually used when they launched to give to call centre staff, so they knew what the customers were experiencing and could support them on the journey. And actually this just to show you the document is kind of, in a way, it looks to me like things we used to do to define websites. So it's got I think there's a lot of skills that are in UX that can actually, if we just allow ourselves to step out of saying, this doesn't have to be digital for me to use some of the tools that we use to describe processes and experiences, and they can be processes and experiences that involve interactions with human beings or with paper and other channels, and how those things come together. So the second case I wanted to share was about how thinking about the status and making sure that we don't just focus on users and tasks, but maybe step into customers or consumers. So again, a simpler interaction can be much more complex as a proposition to a customer. If we understand where customers are, we can look at an interaction in a different way and hone it and make it more relevant to them, but also more relevant to the business that's providing it. So in this case, we had a client who is a software company who make bills for other people. So if you're a telephone company or a power company and you send out millions of bills, you would buy these guys, and they actually do the whole thing, the software, and then the printing and the folding and the mail out. And they realised that their customers would really like it if they could help them migrate from paper to digital. So how can we offer our telecom company customer a way to shift their customers onto a different channel which will save them money and save the postage? So their idea was that you have I'm not sure if I buy it, but you have a QR code or some kind of mechanism which is the switching moment where it's a trigger on a piece of paper that takes you to an online space where you then choose to go a different path in the future. But what we did was we said, okay, well look, that's fine, but we were talking here about customers of a telecoms company who have a certain life cycle that they go through. You know, here I think it's more like it's a year or it's an 18-month cycle where I subscribe and I'm signed up and I'm tied in and I have my new handset and you know, I go through that and I might be pay as you go or I might be prepaid. And they hadn't really thought about that. They just thought about this interaction point. You know, can we get people from paper to digital? So what we first did was just think, okay, well there are a number of different customer contexts that if we start from, we might get a more specific design that answers what is currently important to these customers. So they might be prepaid customers. They might be customers who've just bought, which is a really interesting point we've learned from other projects. When you've just got something, you're actually quite interested and you're excited. I've just got this new handset. I've got to sort it all out. It's all shiny and I haven't dropped it yet, and I'm actually paying attention. So it's a really great point to talk to. And then we had the classic thing they thought of. It's a bit, I've just received my bill, obviously a key point. And we found out from the telecom company that they also had a reward system. So we thought, can it fit to that point where you're trying to redeem your rewards, or can it time to that? The one that was really exciting, because we were doing this work in Brazil, was actually when we talked to the telecom company, one of their biggest strategic objectives was to get people to become prepaid customers, you know, to become post-pay customers. So all the people who are topping up, paying as you go, they want to sign up and hold. So then we were able to say, actually, well, look, here's another customer point where I might transition from being prepaid to post-pay. It's another context that we can design for. So then we were able to look at, okay, the possibility to convert to digital in these particular contexts. And do classic design activities of saying, okay, so let's create a scenario for that. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Where does it happen? So we're suddenly saying this might not happen at home when you receive the bill in the post. It might be something that's triggered in store, and it's something therefore that the telecom company can actually drive, train people, push forward, and actively introduce every new customer to this is the way our bill works, rather than just hope in vain that you send things out and people actually even see the QR code. So then with those scenarios in mind, we were able to very quickly prototype, find customers. We worked in the shops of the company as people were coming through. So we were looking at, I think it's very important for us in service design. Most of our work around prototyping or testing isn't really lab-based. It's about going out and trying to do something in a context of usage. So this was running around Sao Paulo, trying to find customers and give them this experience, which was purely mocked up, so there's no system in place to support it. It's just that it feels like a real experience. And that allowed us to create report data for our client and their customer that was saying, actually, this is the potential of these different things. You know, you have X number of prepaid customers and we found that 25% of that 50% have the right kind of smartphone to do this and also understand what a QR code is. So we were able to sort of shift out of that interaction and then answering a question about does this work or not work, do people do it or not do it, and then take a bit more control of the context and say, well, if you did it in this way, in this context, you'd have a better chance than if you did it in that way, in that context. And also we're creating some original data for this company, because they don't know a lot of this stuff, because it wasn't just their customers, it was their potential customers. So we're starting to look at the kind of the potential of this within a wider context. So those were those two key things, I think. That service thinking allows you to just push out and say, I'm not going to be constrained by purely the interaction that I've been asked to look at. I want to look at that in its broader context. And also, we need to understand the sort of the depth of who the people are that we're addressing and other things that are going on in their lives that allow us to make better recommendations, especially better commercially valuable recommendations about what might be happening. So we're not just necessarily doing a usability fix, but we're actually taking something that's very practical and very much about an interaction and stepping up into something that has some quite significant strategic value. So that's me. I hope that's a good kind of crossover between what you guys do and what we've been developing over the years. I've always been very keen that sort of two communities recognise their mutual interdependency. And interesting when Andy introduced to say this was we're another discipline. I've never really thought of it like that, but that was kind of my intention. So, thank you very much.